They saw him trying to go and deal drugs in the streets. He was beaten up. He was undressed in public, and they said essentially, stay off our turf. And that's why he felt humiliated. He was angry. He came back and he shot those young boys, 14, 15, 16, at that table.
Hundreds of people in France who are believed to be gang members have been involved in a mass shootout in the western city of Poitiers. The gunfight on Thursday night left 5 seriously wounded and led France's Interior Minister, Bruno Retailleau, to warn that his country is at a tipping point on drug-related violence. So earlier I spoke to Anne Elisabeth Moutet, the commentator, and she explained some of the build-up to last night's event.
I would say that suddenly people realize that we've got drug gangs in France in places that are not Marseille, basically. We had all the movies and TV series about Marseille, but even in the French countryside, you've got now mid-sized cities that have the same problems. It's also that the first reporting on this said that it was a ranged battle, about 400 people, and the Home Secretary, who was told that by his own people and the police at the beginning, this morning said it was about 400 people. There were about 400 people in the kind of square in front of the restaurant where this happened, but the actual sort of ranged battle with weapons was 60 people, which is still quite a lot, and the others were coming from 2 communities that are more or less at odds. And the young man who came and killed the 15-year-old boy, he came with a 22 a carbine, and he shot at the boy, who apparently had not been involved in anything. But it's a question of rivalries in the drug trade. The young man had arrived from either Guadeloupe or Guyane, it's not entirely certain, but French West Indies, had tried possibly with contacts, local contacts, to set up trade as a drug dealer at Poitiers in this neighborhood called Les Couronneries. And he came against another group of people, many of whom are from French, but whose parents came from places like Algeria, and sometimes grandparents. And they saw him trying to go and deal drugs in the streets. He was beaten up. He was undressed in public, and they said essentially, stay off our turf. And that's why he felt humiliated. He was angry. He came back and he shot those young boys, 14, 15, 16, at that table. The owner of the cafe where they were drinking say, look, these people are not connected with the drug trade. They are too young. But you had representatives of both communities then sort of fighting among themselves. And as I said, 60 is already a large number. And the result is 2 or 3 adolescents who could die overnight. More who are injured, but will make it, and they're still. I don't know whether I saw a report that he was about to be caught. I don't know whether the perpetrator was caught yet.
It's pretty shocking. I mean, we're talking about both the ages of the people involved, the teenagers, and the numbers, and the fact that it's not, as you say, in Marseille, which we all remember from the French Connection and so many other gang movies. Now, the Home Secretary, the Interior Minister, Bruno Retailleau, who is known to be a hardliner, is talking about France being at a tipping point between managing all of this and becoming Mexico. How are people responding to that dire warning?
Well, I would say, people respond as expected. The media say, no, you should not exaggerate. And on social media, it's the opposite. And people saying this is under the reality, and the reality must be somewhere in between. But it is shocking. Everybody knows that there's drug dealing, and people always emphasize, when you talk about it to mayors, for instance, in Paris, they always emphasize the fact that druggies should be helped, and they should be helped detoxify, and jailing them is not the solution, mostly because there isn't room in French jails anymore, and there's less about the drug traffic, but the drug trafficking exists. The police works at it, but it's lots of little ants and mules carrying stuff, and it is very true that it has increased tremendously because you have gangs making fortunes out of it, and it is also true that this is slowly becoming part of the various political discourse with everybody, confirming their own biases in light of something which is essentially a breakdown of public order.
I'm guessing that those on the political right, like the National Rally, are saying this is an ethnic and cultural problem because of the ethnic origins of those who appear to be primarily involved. Is that right?
I wouldn't go that far. If you look at social media, I haven't seen anybody who is identified, for instance, an MP for the National Rally to say this. What they do say is that the government is talking loud and not acting, and that it's unable to maintain law and order. And that's really, it's more framed as a question of order and a question of not being able to furnish the various sort of services of the state, and that includes education, that includes many things that would enable those young people to have a trajectory that leads them into employment and possibly a diploma if you're lucky enough.
Right. And then what constructive proposals are either the political parties or the police in these various cities and towns coming forward with?
If you speak to the police say that half the time they arrest young people and they get thrown back into the street, partly because there are hesitations about training so young people, which is a problem in itself, and the other one being that there isn't enough space in prisons. Every president since Nicolas Sarkozy, and that's 20 years ago, said that they would build new prisons, and there's always a good reason not to build new prisons. And then you find yourself in people who say that prison doesn't solve anything.
Bien sûr, cet événement a commencé à 22h.
Of course. This event began at 10:45 last night. I was informed last night. There are currently 5 injured, of whom several are seriously injured and even very seriously injured. What started as a shooting at a restaurant ended up in a fight between rival gangs that involved several hundred people. I am told that the chief constable made a report quoting between 400 and 600 people. 400 and 600 people involved in a fight with weapons. With all kinds of weapons, of course. We did not discover the problem. We did not discover it. I think we're at a tipping point. I remember 2 years ago when I was in the Senate, I used my right to draw on a commission of inquiry, and we had 400 and 600 people. Do we know precisely that this is also linked to drug trafficking? It is linked. I told you this morning, it's all linked to drug trafficking.